So, welcome everyone. Jason Bergquist with RecycleMe. I came from the other Portland, Maine, last night, and just to frame a reference, it's the one with the better food and the better craft breweries and okay. We had about 2 feet of snow when I left, but I'm also going to say better weather. This was a nasty little walk I had this morning, so all right. There's my warm-up jokes. Okay, so everything you want to know about EPR, but were afraid to ask. Colette did a great job sort of teeing this up for me. She talked about some of the challenges we have in this country with waste and recycling infrastructure. EPR is one of the many potential solutions that are being proffered right now to solve for this. So we are part of the RAND group of companies. We're based out of Germany. We've been there for close to 30 years. Operating under the RecycleMe consulting brand, helping brands work with EPR for packaging compliance strategies, as well as kind of some of the other EPR adjacent things, of course, battery electronics, that type of thing. We also, on the other side, operate 12 different producer responsibility organizations worldwide, 10 in Europe and 2 in Canada. As most people know, EPR is much more mature in Europe, so they have competitive pros there, unlike the US, at least so far. So we operate 10 of them there for packaging. And then in Canada, where we've been for close to 20 years, under the RecycleMe brand, we do consulting, but then we operate the bottle build program in Manitoba, and then also a tire recycling program out of Ontario, which is also a type of competitive EPR program. My background is sort of evenly split between waste and recycling infrastructure. I have operated single stream MRFs, I've operated dirty MRFs, I've operated bottle bill MRFs. Also on the manufacturing side, I've got a legal background. I did all that intentionally because I knew I wanted to grow up to be an EPR consultant, and those things all come together at play there. Okay, I'm going to go fast because I'm in between you and lunch. This is also a lot of ground to cover. Okay, so we're skipping the rock across the EPR waters, so to speak. This presentation I can certainly share. There's a lot of information here that I'm going to go over fast. So if you would like the full deck, please ask, because the intention is it's got kind of an EPR manual built into it. The disclaimer. So unlike my HP colleague, you do have to pay me for legal advice. This is not considered legal advice. And the other 2 pieces here is literally the EPR landscape is changing so fast in this country, I could have sent this deck yesterday and it could have already been out of date. I'll point out a couple things that are already, or at least minor updates to it. And the last thing to point out is you're going to see direct information from Circular Action Alliance, the producer responsibility organization for 5 of the 7 states. We do not represent them. We're not paid by them. We have no business relationship. But they are the source of truth for a lot of this, so it makes best sense just to copy and paste from some of their stuff. So. Okay, state of the states. I'm going to work under the assumption most people here know what EPR for packaging is, so this is not a 101. I'm not going to go through that. We can talk about that at the roundtable if you'd like. I'll be hosting one of those. But we started this this way. We started this year with 5 states that had passed EPR legislation. By May, we had 2 more. So as we close out 2025, the first full year of EPR for packaging legislation, we have 7 states total that have it at various stages of play. We also have 3 more states that passed, this isn't how it's always done, but they passed a needs assessment phase, which is sort of the first logical step in doing this, figuring out what is it the state wants. I'm going to say this a couple times during this presentation. One of the things to always keep in mind with EPR regulation for packaging, it is solving at a local level for what the state's particular waste and recycling infrastructure challenges are. So we're going to talk about patchwork. We're going to talk about lack of harmonization. Certainly this is a theme. This will get said all the time when we talk about EPR. But there's rationale behind it. That this really is, I had a mentor early on when I started with waste management, said garbage is local, about people. EPR is local and about people. This is what it's trying to solve for. We then have the 3 states that I talked about. We've got Hawaii, Rhode Island, and Illinois that have passed that first stage. And then at any given day, 10 states plus or minus that have EPR going through various stages of their internal legislative process. We're keeping an eye certainly on New York. It's gotten close a couple years in a row. They've got 2 competitive bills. They typically run out of time, but it's getting close. We've got Massachusetts just south of me that gets really close. One of the interesting ones that we're keeping an eye on is Tennessee. Not to make this political, but so far the EPR states are all blue. Tennessee is the first red one. It's got a really nice package called the Waste for Jobs Act. So we're watching that very closely. But again, you've got a lot of states that are paying attention to this and working on it. One of the things that is interesting with EPR for packaging is that despite, which has already been commented on a couple times this morning, sort of the anti-regulatory, somewhat aggressive nature of our current administration, EPR is gaining traction. Why? Again, it's local, it's about people, it's solving for states' recycling infrastructure challenges. So, okay, eye test for those in the back, but this is sort of a matrix of what those 7 states look like. Okay, and one of the things that will jump out right away is this area of lack of harmonization that I talked about. There's harmonization built in here. This is EPR for packaging. Every state's focused on packaging. But then if you look at sort of that second row, the cover material category list, the CMC list, you see differences. Right off the bat, one of the things you see is bottle bill, DRS, deposit return schemes, is a form of EPR. Right? EPR is not new to this country. We have it, bottle bills in older form, we have it for mattresses, we have it for paint, we have it for e-waste. We've got a couple of these states that have really well-established bottle bill programs in place. Certainly Oregon and Maine, 2 of the more successful in this country. We've got California as well. So in those situations, the EPR for packaging regulation does not focus on beverage containers because it's already captured in our DRS. So why am I even wasting airspace with that? It's a challenge in these early years for the brands complying, because in those 3 states, you're already doing your bottle bill reporting. Now you're adding your EPR for packaging reporting. In Oregon and California, which include business-to-business compliance, you are reporting in extra ways. You're also reporting on your secondary packaging if you're a beverage producer. The cardboard box that goes around a 12-pack of beer, for instance, not included in your bottle bill reporting, is included in your EPR reporting. And then you've got these non-bottle bill states, Colorado being the one that was in play this year, where it all got reported. So a little tricky navigation there, right? Trying to figure out where to put these different things. We look at then some of the other targets. We see different focuses on paper. One of the things, and we're going to go a little bit deeper into depth with California, some of the states hyper-focused on plastic reduction, right? Certainly California has some of the most ambitious goals of any state, and you could even say internationally, one of the more ambitious programs for plastic reduction. So you see that built in here as well. The next thing down, which I already touched on a bit, different scopes. So you've got some states, Colorado, year 1, kept it fairly simple. It was really looking at packaging that a customer walks out of the front of the store with in their hands, or they get through the mail through e-commerce. Maine is kind of matching that, versus Oregon, California, wide open scope. So basically, all business to business included in that scope of packaging. So not just what the consumer walks out of the front of the store with, but the packaging that gets used to move stuff around this country. It may never end up in the hands of a consumer, but if there's packaging used to move product around, it's within scope, it got included here. We have clients that make packaging that they sell to companies to use for the products that you get on the shelves, fully pulled into scope. And that these scopes also include primary, the kind you think of, secondary, tertiary. Tertiary is the fancy word for the packaging we use to ship goods around. Pallets, corner boards, shrink wrap, strapping, etc. All included in scope. Okay, big deal, included in scope. That means there are fees associated with it. So Oregon did not include the pallets in the initial reporting. California did. Now I don't want to get into all the minutiae. They haven't actually applied the fees yet. But if you think about the weight of wood and plastic pallets that go around, the fact that producers are reporting on that in California, that's a huge, huge ticket item built into that, just based on the pounds alone. Wood will be one of the lower end of the fees, but a pallet is heavy, right? Trust me, I throw them on our bonfire. This is what we do in Maine. So different levels of scoping there. And the last thing to point out is whether or not it's full or partial funding. The reason to point this out is the math on EPR kind of works backwards. And that is that the needs assessment or the program, whatever the methodology is used to determine how much it will cost to improve the recycling infrastructure, that creates then the funding goal, which in turn is funded by the producers paying in. And so it does make a difference whether the state is trying to fully or partially fund their program, because there's going to be a financial target that the producer is paying into. It'll affect the size of the tranche, the pieces of the pie that the producers are paying into. Won't get into too much detail here. This is the basic mechanism behind EPR for packaging. You've got a PRO, or producer responsibility organization. In Maine, where our state motto is "Don't tell us what to do," it's not called a PRO, it's called an SO, a stewardship organization. But you've got various forms of a typical PRO-type mechanism, which is a non-government organization is brought in, a third party is brought in to take the regulations and turn them into program plan, turn them into action. Certainly in this first year, for Oregon, Colorado, and California, the heavy lifting was on setting up the program, setting out the fee schedule, working with producers and reporting, gathering the data, now sending out invoices. But really, even the heavier lifting comes next, and it's already happening here, which is, okay, now that money is being turned around into those core components of the EPR program, funding the infrastructure, funding innovation, funding education, all the parts that will actually help to solve for the problems that we're looking to. So that's happening right now in this state, the first one. Okay, EPR in the West. So we have the 7 states, but these were the 3 kind of in play this year. Oregon being the first state with a fully signed off on EPR for packaging program, right? A to Z signed off on, which of course made it the target for the first lawsuit filed against EPR for packaging. So there is a lawsuit pending right now, and there was actually an injunction filed last week. This is one of the things that didn't make the deck. This is how fast this is happening by the National Association of Warehousers, NAW. So we're all paying attention to that. Not surprising that we would see a lawsuit coming, but here it is. We're watching it very carefully. From a legal standpoint, don't want to get all the nuts and bolts of it. There's a lot of things I think that are fairly easy to dismiss. One of them is sort of abdication of states' rights. That is not easy to dismiss. That probably will be argued about. The idea being that, sort of like Doge, you had a non-government organization handed this whole thing to implement, sort of out of the state's hands. That's the argument built into the middle of the lawsuit, for what it's worth. Okay. We then had Colorado, as I said, very different scope. That happened. Producers had a report in July. Haven't paid invoices for it yet, but that was sort of year 1 of Colorado. Still doesn't have a signed off on program plan. We expect to see that before this month is out, we hope. Clock's ticking. And then California, 2 days before being signed into law, the governor who first rolled it out pulled it back for considerable revision. We'll talk about that more here in a minute. Okay, this could be a whole hour. I'm not going to chew up your time here. But lessons learned from just these first 3 states, challenges that our clients and anyone else having to comply with the EPR regulations had to deal with this year. First off, we talked about a lot of this, but that difference in definitions got really tricky. You know, whether or not it was just business to consumer or business to business. Different interpretations among both Oregon and Colorado. I already touched on as far as the pallets go, as far as what is included in secondary and tertiary packaging. And we talked about the bottle bill piece, right? When is a package a package? This is a fun one. So packaging, by definition, is designed to protect or contain the product therein. Easy, right? No, not so easy. This state was certainly the testing ground. And one of the things that happened as we got towards the 11th hour of trying to report was then the question had to be answered, when is a package not a package? Now, EPR has been in Europe for close to 30 years. It's been in Canada for 20 years. So none of this was necessarily surprising. But the idea that basically the guidance was rolled out that indicated if by removing that package you render the product inside unusable, then it's not a package as far as EPR compliance goes. So, for example, ink pens. The plastic tube around that ink, by any other definition, would be a package. But by removing that plastic tube, that ink is therefore rendered unusable in its intended purpose. Not a package, not in scope. Lighters. I hate to use the word disposable because we're at a sustainability conference, but disposable lighters, right? That plastic casing is arguably a package designed to protect or contain the lighter fluid inside. You remove that plastic casing away, your lighter fluid's no good. Out of scope, right? Global company, 3 letters, did quite well through these 2 exemptions if you think about it, the ink pen and lighters, okay? There are other examples like this. If you go to the other side, though, where we were given guidance, as well as everyone else, on when a package is in scope, don't necessarily align with this logic. Chapstick, lipstick, glue sticks, mascara, any kind of liquid cosmetic product, where if you remove that package, would be theoretically unusable, maybe lipstick's on the edge, I don't know, those were all in scope. We represent a small cosmetics association. They were quite up in arms about this, as you can imagine. On the other side, it turns out that the glass candle holder lobby in this country is incredibly powerful because the determination was made if you take that glass holder away, the candle can still be used. So therefore, not in scope. I'm sorry, can't be used, so not in scope. Okay, so some of these things got pretty tricky towards the end. Okay, more sort of nuts and bolts. 3 states, 3 different cover material category lists. These are the lists that determine your fees. You have the material types, wood, aluminum, glass, plastic, rigid, flexible, typically is how this lines out. And then you got subcategories. And so this is where you, as the brand trying to comply, take your packaging and you fit it into the category, and then it tells you what you're going to be paying from a fee standpoint, right? EPR, one of the goals here is to reduce difficult or impossible to recycle materials. So of course, the fees are going to be focused on achieving that outcome. You're going to pay a lot more for every pound of styrofoam that you put into a state than you are for cardboard, for instance, right? But 3 states, 3 different lists. Oregon's and Colorado's fairly close, 60 categories. There are some differences, but more or less aligned. There was some cooperation there that was nice to see. California, 98 categories, way beyond the other 2. And then actually 2 other pieces to that list. One where you had to determine whether or not your packaging was recyclable or compostable according to California standards. And then, and I'll talk about this again when we get to California, you had to account for every single piece of plastic that you sold into the state. So this is similar to federal plastic registry in Canada. It's similar to some of the components of PPWR, the harmonized program that's being considered in Europe, but way beyond those other 2 states and then the other ones that are going to follow. We're not seeing anything like that in the states that are going to come online next year. So a level of granularity in reporting way beyond anything else that's been seen so far with EPR. Last thing here, different targets and different eco-modulation. Those work together. So eco-modulation is the way in which these EPR regulations try to incentivize more sustainable packaging and de-incentivize less sustainable packaging. So you've got bonuses. You get bonuses for entering more sustainable packaging into the stream by introducing more post-consumer recycled content, et cetera. You have malices, penalties for not. So the idea is as the programs progress, back to that example, someone that's insisting on putting styrofoam in a stream, you're going to pay a whole lot more than someone who is working on their packaging to, in one method or another, introduce a higher level of sustainability to it. But that all sounds great, but you've got 3 different states with 3 different goals. In some cases, potentially even contradictory. One of the things Oregon did is it said, if you do a life cycle assessment, they're really looking high level, carbon footprint level. If you do a life cycle assessment on your packaging, just for doing that and sharing the data, you get a reduction in your fees, right? That may or may not, and the jury's still out here, but that may or may not inform and help and result in fee mitigation in the other states. So hopefully it's not a standalone. To me, and I say this towards the end, very effective way of analyzing your stream and taking that data to make sure that you're making informed decisions. But it's a standalone right now versus the Colorado and California plans, which are different. And of course, this is going to be a broken record. California has a level of granularity in their eco-modulation program beyond any of the other states right now. Okay, timelines. Another level or another example of lack of harmonization. These were all the deadlines that producers had to comply with this year. 3 different reporting dates. One of the things you'll see here at the end, Circular Action Alliance is an attempt to harmonize things, promoting the fact that they are going to try and have all the reporting done in May of next year. So editorial, I'm not necessarily on board with that. When you've got 3 different cover material category lists, 3 different types of reporting, and you're about to add 5 more to that. There's no sense, and they're talking about simplified reporting, but there's no sense that Maine, Minnesota, Maryland, Washington State is going to pull things together a whole lot much more tighter than they already are. They're working together, which is good, but we're still seeing different lists, different cover material categories, different fee structures that now is all going to have to be reported in the single month. Okay, let's talk about California a little bit more. I think it's important to focus on this because all eyes are on California now, okay? Sorry, Oregon, the attention shifted away from you. Now it's on California. for obvious reasons, right? It's the fifth largest economy in the world, maybe fourth largest, right behind Germany. This is going to have a massive, massive impact financially on brands trying to comply. It is an incredibly widespread, complex program. So certainly a state like New York is watching this very closely to see how it goes. And we can expect some copy and paste from some of the larger states, depending on that. And this is the first state I will say we are an international company that operates on a somewhat local level. This is the first state where we've had a steady flow of European companies reaching out and saying, hey, help us with California. All eyes are on California. As I said, the governor pulled back the EPR program. It still is under revision. We still don't have a final program, but these goals remain unchanged. And as I said, most ambitious that we've seen anywhere. And that is by 2032, the end of the sort of first program period, 100% of the packaging sold in the state will be recyclable or compostable. This is per California's internal guidelines. We've touched on that ugly word greenwashing a couple times already this morning. There'll be no greenwashing this. You have to prove before you put that label on your package that says it's recyclable or compostable, you have to prove it. There's a companion bill to SB 54 that's called Truth in Labeling, Truth in Recycling. And the idea is you don't get to put chasing arrows on your package. You have to demonstrate per California's standards that your stuff is recyclable or compostable. The compostable thing is interesting, by the way, as far as being an alternate path towards reaching these goals. That is something different and unusual in California that we're watching closely. The next one, that 65% of all single-use plastic packaging, very specific now, will be actually recycled. So not just recyclable, but will actually be recycled. And so this is part of where the heavy lifting I talked about, the second phase of EPR, where Circular Action Alliances, they have to prove what they're doing. They're going to have to prove out the fact that the funding coming into the state is improving things, and that in fact that we're increasing the recycling, right, coming through there. Really, not the only state, but really, really laser focused on single-use packaging. For those of you that travel, once you kind of eyes are open to this, you get why. We're still inundated with single-serve packaging, right? The delicious coffee in my hotel room this morning came with about 3 different layers of packaging in the can, in the can, in the can. None of it's recyclable, by the way, right? So this is sort of the driving rationale behind this. And last, 25% reduction in plastic packaging, okay? Keep in mind, California has a bottle bill. So that's out of scope for this. But it's the best example because we can all sort of tactile, feel this. If you think about your standard water bottle, PET water bottle, you take that cap off when it's still full, you apply half a pound too much pressure, what happens? Got a waterfall, right? It's already pretty thin stuff, is my point. So if we're talking about trying to downsize that by 25%, this arguably, and I've talked to a lot of plastics professionals, is probably the most difficult to achieve of these goals. That's what they're arguing. If you talk about flex film and it retaining its tensile strength, how do you reduce it by 25% by weight and make it still work? Right? I went to law school. I didn't go to med school or engineering, way beyond my understanding. I was stumped a couple weeks back at one of these presentations. Someone raised their hand towards the end and said, "Can you please define for us plastic?" I can't define plastic, right? The idea being there's actually debates going on because whether your product or not is defined as plastic in California can greatly impact your obligation into that state. And the last thing here that is not a typo, there's a $5 billion plastic pollution mitigation fund in California. No other state has that. That will be an extra line item on your invoices if you're selling it to California. So, as I said, they are taking plastic reduction, if not elimination, very seriously in that state. Okay? The timing, these are the deadlines that came along. November 15th was the deadline for producers to report. It was not in the statute. It was requested by Circular Action Alliance to keep things on track. As of our presentation last week, there were 1,800 producers that reported. Guessing some people were missing there. And this is where we are with EPR. I had a conversation earlier at the break about this. Is right now, yes, all of the regulations have fines built in, but no fines have been levied. Letters have come out from Oregon, which is good, saying, hey, we noticed you didn't report. You got to report in. I think there was over 3,000 producers that reported in for Oregon. But there clearly is still a significant population of free riders out there that if we want to think the positive side of this, aren't aware of EPR, but then there's also a negative narrative, which says they're waiting this out to see what happens until the penalties get put out there. Strict Action Alliance publishes the lists and incentivizes producers who did report to inform on ones that didn't, because the less producers that report in, the bigger tranche of the pie. This is why I made a point of pointing out the funding goal. That funding goal doesn't change just because only half of the potentially obligated producers reported. It's the same financial goal. So if only half reported, each one's picking up twice the bill. Rough math, right? We talked about a lot of this already. Again, I told you I'm going to go fast. I don't want to slow down lunch. Packaging, foodware, and then we've got this very comprehensive cover material category list. Okay? We talked about this, the fact that you've got to report in the number of plastic components. The level of seriousness that California is placing on plastic means that if you've got paper coated with laminate, you report it as a plastic piece. If you've got ink that contains plastic in it, you're reporting that by both weight and by piece. The level of granularity here is very, very significant, right? This is the flow. And so basically there are even two different paths as far as whether or not your individual piece of plastic is, someone earlier mentioned about that 2-inch rule within MRFs. You have to report it regardless, you're just reporting a different category. So part of what you have to do as a producer is determine, is this going to fall through the grading and therefore not probably be recycled, or is the grading in a typical MRF going to stop it, therefore be recycled? This is the type of information California is tracking. This is a snapshot of the cover material category list. Doesn't even have the reporting form, which has that added column for the plastic pieces, but this is what I'm referring to, where you've got the individual categories, and you can see the level of detail there, but then you've got the 2 columns in addition, where you have to certify that it is either recyclable or compostable. Okay? Back to the reporting, how you pull this stuff apart. 2 examples here. We have our delicious generic salsa on the one side, right? The idea being that you're going to be reporting that bottle, the glass, as one material. That label, because it's attached and it's not intended to be removed, gets included the weight of the glass. But guess what? Potentially, if the glue holding that label on contains plastic, whatever that's defined as, you may have to report that. And then you've got a separate metal lid. That sort of is more common sense when you think about it, right? Or easier to understand. But then this other category is where it gets a little trickier. You've got an aerosol can. Whether that can is plastic or metal, doesn't really matter. You're going to be reporting as it's one piece. But then you've got the mechanism, the firing mechanism on top. Because it's not intended to be pulled apart, you're going to be reporting that as another piece. But let's say the can is plastic, but the nozzle is a different type of plastic. Those are 2 individual pieces you're reporting, 2 different types of plastic. You saw that granularity of the different types of plastic I showed in the slide before. And then you've got your plastic top. So more often than not, I can tell you from doing the reporting for producers, 3 different types of plastic when you're looking at 98 different categories, over 1/3 of which in California are subcategories of plastic. So now I should point out, when I say I'm looking at this, we have a special guest star in the room today with Clearest. We partner with Clearest quite a bit on doing the actual reporting. So if you're interested in some of this stuff, join the roundtable so Chip can talk about the actual data piece, because I could do a whole nother half hour on data management, data cleaning up, all that kind of stuff. That's the key of successful EPR reporting. So that's why I'm not talking about it here. I left that fun stuff for Chip. Okay, last thing to touch on here is one of the things that's under consideration right now in California, and then we'll talk about why it matters, is a theme that is in the other EPR programs, but is being potentially broadened in California. And that is, if the packaging, primary, secondary, tertiary, is required to protect the safety of the consumer by either the FDA or USDA, it potentially will be out of scope. So a couple of the ones that are fairly easy to get our head around would be pharmaceuticals, always kicked out, but let's say non-prescription pharmaceutical category, bottle of Tylenol, you got the tamper-resistant foil, that probably will be out of scope. The child-proof lid probably be out of scope. If this logic follows, that entire bottle will be out of scope. Actually, Tylenol is not the best example. The best ones are ones that medication that can be prescribed and can be bought over the counter, right? Because that's kind of a crossover area. The other piece they talk about, which is kind of understandable, is with meat, fish, poultry. The tray, typically styrofoam, right? The antimicrobial sponge, the flex film that wraps it. All designed to make sure you don't get sick from eating the meat, poultry, fish, could be taken out of scope, okay? Secondary, tertiary packaging. If as a producer, I'm sending a pallet in with 100% of packaging that's out of scope, potentially my tertiary packaging, pallet, shrink wrap, corner boards, strapping is out of scope, okay? If I mix the load, it changes it. So logistically, you got to think about that for a second. But we're hearing this argument attempting to get greatly expanded. There is a cereal company out there that is making the case that the plastic bag that holds your cereal is designed to protect your safety as a consumer, and therefore the cardboard box, because it protects the plastic bag, is designed to protect your safety as a consumer, and therefore by extension, if I ship all that on one pallet, everything is excluded. That's just an example of where this extension is being broadened to, okay? Why should we care? Back to that idea of the tranche. I have seen analysis that say if all this goes through, it could be 50%, 60% of what we see in a grocery store aisle gets exempted from EPR for packaging in California. What that will result in is that the producers that are non-exempt will be paying that much more. The funding goal is the funding goal is the funding goal, okay? There is a huge amount of focus, debate, argument, struggling with flex film. Anyone that has been on the logistics side of things, flex film is everywhere, and it works. And no one can figure out how to make it out of seaweed, right? I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, right now, there is no alternative to plastic that is proving itself out in the marketplace. There are all kinds of interesting, really cool stuff going on. This includes packaging as well, all kinds of packaging. But so far, flex film has been the one that is not solvable for, and as Colette can tell you, it is the demon of any single stream or dirty MRF. That flex film gets in there, it tangles things up, it shuts down your entire line, right? So this is one of the central pieces of this argument happening in California that we fully expect to keep happening in the other states. Okay, Maine is coming next. Right now, there is no named SO. There will be an RFP coming out, hopefully in the coming days, probably early next year at this point, to get one in. But again, if anything, it resembles Colorado a little bit more as far as primary focus on the consumer, okay, versus the full scope of business to business. Okay. This is what I alluded to as far as the unified reporting that Circular Action Alliance is recommending. It's not set in stone yet, but this is what it could look like. Just, you know, if there's anyone in the room that's on the finance side and wants to know what their invoices will be coming, this is right now what the structure looks like and how the payments will be set up. The other piece of potential good news for next year, by the way, as far as harmonization goes, is that all the sales data will be from 2025. One of the challenges for this year is California was using 2023, while Oregon and Colorado were using 2024. So that's a help. But the invoices that will be coming out next year will be based on that. Okay, home stretch. You know, what I always try and do is end on a positive note. This is quite challenging, of course. And right now, this is 3 states, and we've got 5 more coming, and we've got maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 more behind that. I will often get asked, well, when is the federal harmonization to come along? And then I get a big belly laugh. Anyone that's paying attention to the news, you know, I would not bet on that anytime soon as far as Congress putting something that ties things together. But sooner or later, producers are going to be, we'll get a larger voice on this because having each state come along with all these different things, different definition, different lists, different fee structures is untenable, right? So something's got to give at a certain point, but at least right now, this is what we're looking at state by state. But there are areas of harmonization to lean into. Okay, Circular Action Alliance does have a unified portal, unified registration system. Therefore, the data work you do, the data prep you do, will be consistent as far as how you plug it into the reporting thing. And this is not to be undersold. If you're someone in your organization that's actually had to do the reporting, you can appreciate the fact that that portal at least is fairly user-friendly. I've seen some much worse ones in Europe, for instance. I talked about this life cycle assessment piece. There's a way for you to reduce fees in Oregon right off the bat, and you can use that data for the other states as well. And these last two, of course, invest in packaging innovation, especially plastics, right? There, as I said, there is really cool, interesting things going on in the packaging innovation space, and it's becoming affordable. 3 years ago, the argument was, okay, yes, I can change my packaging to be 100% recyclable, but it's going to triple the price. That's not the case anymore. And if you can think holistically and step back and take, even if it is a bit more expensive, but offset it by not just the difference in fees, but then the potential bonuses you'll get through the use of the eco-modulation programs, it will become something that is cost viable, right? It has ROI to it. And the last thing I'll say is sort of this idea of patience. This was never going to be perfect from day one. This will take some time for the many, many, many wrinkles to get ironed out. But we are seeing signs where certainly Maryland, Minnesota, Maine talking to each other, making sure at least there's a unified definition for producer. That's a big first step. And as I've said, and this isn't to give them more credit than they're due, but you kind of can't go wrong by focusing your work on lowering your fees in California. Given the size, given likely the difference in your consumer population in California versus the other states, and particularly if we talk about New York copying some of California stuff, that's 1 in 8 consumers in this country, those 2 states would represent, right? That is a good place to start. The data cleanup you'll have to do to be able to report, that you did have to do, will pay off in the other states, but then the overall strategy that you do will pay off, particularly if you're a global organization, because, as I've mentioned, PPWR is coming in Europe. There are a lot of similarities between PPWR and SB 54, so if you're selling globally and you're meeting those two, that's going to pay off dividends for you. So, okay. No questions. I am doing a round table, so.
Exactly. No. Thank you, Jason.
All right.
Thank you. That was definitely a comprehensive